Okay, so back in late 2016, early 2017, I was an IT consultant, and over the preceding 10 or so years, I've been concurrently building up a media presence at the same time. And I was thinking, I've got to do something desperate, because the world is really not looking too flash at the moment. And I wanted to write this book that tells the story of people, how people who are inspirational, people who we can look up to and go, you know what, we have the science and we have the technology, we can do something about the problems we're facing, climate, environment, and so on. And so I set out to write this book of 10 biographies of people who are working in the environment. And it's called 10 Journeys. It's their journeys, but really it's 11 journeys, because my journey was part of this. I think we are in real trouble. There's no doubt in my mind that we are in a really dangerous situation. And this is not like other crises that we faced in the past. This is not like World War I or World War II or any of those military conflicts. If we don't fix this problem, it's not a matter of us just learning to speak another language. This is the future, and there is no escaping this one. If we don't fix this one, we don't have a future. And I find it extremely depressing the more I look at the mass delusion of humanity. And you see what's going on in United States politics, and to a less extent our own. And I was talking to another environment activist recently, and she was saying she's got a friend who's clinically depressed because things are that bad. So what are we going to do about it? Are we going to fall into a pit of despair, or are we going to do what it takes, or do what we can to go ahead anyway? So here are the 10 people that I met, and they told me their stories, and at times it was really challenging talking to them, because their stories could be very harrowing, and some of them wept while they were telling me their life stories. Some of them have come through really vast personal adversity, and yet they haven't given up. They're in there doing remarkable things. And so I want to draw inspiration for what these people have done. And it's my view, and I think you said already in the introduction, Andrew, we don't have a problem with the science. We have enough science. We don't have a problem with technology. We have a people problem. And the only way we're going to fix this is people. And that's what this book is about. So I'll just quickly take you through some of the people that I've written about, and you'll know a few of them, and I think some of them have presented at CCL events. So in the top left corner there, we have Andrew Blakers, Professor Andrew Blakers. You familiar with that name? Yeah, so, yep. He started his PhD in the laboratories of Professor Martin Green at the Sydney University. And one by one, they were knocking over the records for solar technology. And the fact that you can now buy, like I've got on my roof, 6 kilowatt system. I paid $6,000 for that. And a lot of the innovations that people like him came up with have made that possible. He's a tenacious character, Andrew. The next to the right here is Monica Oliphant. You see she's clutching a book there. That's her father-in-law. That's the famous Sir Mark Oliphant. And ironically, he was a proponent of nuclear energy. And in the early days of the renewable energy program at the ANU, he wanted to shut it down because he didn't think it was a serious contender. But with people like Monica and Andrew and others that we'll talk about, we now know that it hands down beats nuclear energy. Coal is dead. gas is dead, and the only way forward is renewable energy. So Monica has been a tireless advocate for renewable energy, and one of the people who've really pushed South Australia ahead in particular. Next is Simon Sheikh. Now, Simon's a really interesting character. He joined Get Up when it was a small organisation, had about 100,000 people, something like that, as director. And when he left, it had nearly 900,000, and it's now a political force to be reckoned with. And his story is one of the examples of a sometimes harrowing story that I learnt from these people. He went on Q&A live on national television and fainted. He was working too hard. The Get Up thing was getting really ahead of him. The studio lights were hot, and he was feeling a bit sick, and he fainted. And that was really traumatic for him. But he hasn't stopped doing what he's doing. He's pulled back from Get Up, and he's created a company called Future Super. And what they're doing is disrupting the finance business. Future Super is an ethical, renewable energy investment company that directs superannuation. Like billions of dollars we have wrapped up in superannuation, and that's now going towards renewable energy and so on. And it's because largely people like him. The next person here holding the globe of the earth, you won't recognise her name, I don't think, but she's a surprising character. I got her to pose for the photo you see here, and I was surprised just how natural she was with a camera. And it turned out she was a professional model across Europe, Vienna, Paris, Amsterdam, London, you name it. And but that's not what she's doing now. She, as a small child, was in Darwin when Cyclone Tracy struck. She was aged about 3, and that was an extremely vivid memory for her. And she saw in that what climate will do to us. We're just passengers when climate shakes its head. We're like the couple of fleas on a dog's back. And so she's developing a game, a climate game that teaches school-age kids, ages 10 to 14 or thereabouts, principles of how climate works. And so she got funding. She went to the ANU to do a PhD, and then she had to get developers to write this game. And she was on her way to a pitch to the developers to say, who wants to help me? And she had a wad of cash in her wallet, which she was going to use for this event, and somebody stole the wallet. Anyway, that game is now going ahead. It's called CO2 Operation, and another example of what people can do when they put their minds to it. Now, the next guy you'll recognise, I think, and he's Charlie Prell, and we've had him on a CCL presentation. Now, Charlie is a 5th generation sheep farmer out on Cookwill, and he and his wife were really struggling through the millennium drought. They were selling off bits of their property. They were going bankrupt, basically. And of course, we've just had another horrific drought. And Charlie heard about wind farms, and he thought, well, I can supplement my farm income. I can get a steady stream from a wind farm. Makes so much sense. And if you have any contact with people on the land, you know it's an incredibly precarious situation for them. They're subject to the whims of the market and climate and so on. And Charlie had these amazing experiences that he told me about. He became a member on the local council, the Shire Council, Cookwill. And in one meeting, somebody said to him, because you're in the pocket of the wind companies, you're as corrupt as Eddie Obeid. And it got pretty horrid. Well, now Charlie's got wind turbine. There he is in that photo, and he's pointing to a turbine just going up. And he was one of the driving forces behind the Wind Alliance and Farmers for Climate Action. And they are a real political force. And he did a terrific presentation recently for CCL. And it's really powerful that the Conservative members of Parliament hear from constituents like farmers who are traditionally their base. Those guys are telling them, do something about climate. And that's such a good thing. Next across here in the green jersey is Olympia Yaga. Olympia had one of the most chaotic stories, life stories. You wouldn't believe the things that she went through, and I had to trim her chapter because it just blew me away. But she's a very determined character, and she got pregnant when she was in the last year of high school. And she had this vision of going into farming, but she got pregnant, and she said, well, I'm going to do it anyway. And she moved into a place out in Goulburn, and she was hanging the washing on the line, and turned around, her little boy was gone. And he'd climbed the fence and drowned in the creek, which, as you can imagine what that meant for her. And then she went on to manage. She had to leave Goulburn, and she started managing a sex shop, would you believe, in Darwin. And then she became a horse groomer in a conservative evangelical family in Wyoming or somewhere like that in the US. And then she married a US Marine, and then the planes struck the Twin Towers, and he got shipped off to Iraq. And I'll have to cut Olympia's story short because it's quite amazing, but she still had this burning desire to get into agriculture and come back to Australia, and farm feed was always a problem. She was trying to do the sums to figure out how she was going to do it. And then she heard about the black soldier fly and maggots. I kid you not, maggots. She has created this business in Canberra that takes food waste, feeds into the black soldier fly maggots, and they produce a really high protein animal feed. Feed it to poultry, pigs, fish, and so on. And this is all part of the circular economy. And her drive and skill has made that happen, and her story has got a long way to go. Now, the next guy leaning against the tree, that's a guy named Leonard Cohen. Yes, Leonard is a real character. He is Jewish. He plays guitar and sings, but he's still very much alive, and he's half Maori. And he created carbon farming companies called Big Green Canopy, Big Green Umbrella, sorry. And then it's now been given over to Greening Australia. But in the time when Mitsubishi and Toyota Motors were struggling in South Australia, he convinced them to spend $1 million on selling a product that would be include carbon offsets as part of the purchase. And how he did that is a really interesting story. I'll leave you to read that in the book. Next, on the bottom left corner here, we have Kate Aughty, or I think she's an honorary professor, Dr. Kate Aughty. I got her to do a presentation to CCL a while ago. She was, until recently, the Environment Commissioner in the ACT. And her story is really interesting. You know, one thing I wanted to learn from these people is what was the spark in their life that fired them off on their journeys. And Monica Oliphant, I'll just quickly backtrack to Monica. She was listening to the radio in the early 1970s, and she was washing the dishes. Yes, something as mundane as washing the dishes, listening to the radio. And Macfarlane Burnett was on the radio, and he was saying, the world wouldn't be at war in the Middle East if over renewable energy. We're there because of oil. And of course, we know how that's played out more recently. Well, Kate Orshey was in the Kimberleys, and her father was working on a research station up there, and they were Aboriginal kids. It was a little one-room school, and there was a little Aboriginal kid at the back who was so intimidated by the bully teacher that she wet herself, and the teacher rubbed the kid's face in it, and Kate and her brother went straight home and told her dad, you wouldn't believe what just happened at school. And that afternoon, the teacher was on an aeroplane back to Perth. Kate later picked up a legal profession. She was one of the senior solicitors on the Aboriginal Deaths in Custody Royal Commissioner, and which is still a really significant part of our history. And Kate is now down in Northern Victoria, not Shepparton, Euroa she's living in, Strathbogie, and she's now pushing various environment projects down there, and I think she's working at a university in Melbourne as well. Next across the list here, the couple there, on the right-hand side there, this one, that's Susan Jeans. Now, I met Susan Jean through a friend of a friend kind of thing, and they said, oh, you should put Susan Jeans in your book. She's a former Liberal Party national member, national MP. I'm going, well, why would I put a Liberal MP in my book? Well, Susan accompanied Robert Hill to the Kyoto Protocol negotiations. And as part of that deal, they got through the mandatory renewable energy target, and she's now a board member on ARENA. And she was a bit of a troublemaker at the National Party, and one commentator quipped and said, oh, she's the independent member for Kingston. And I love some of the stories that the people in the book told me. Like, she put out a press release saying that Pauline Hanson should be black banned. And next thing, she got a request from Stan Zemanic's. And I'm not sure if you know Stan Zemanik, but he was a particularly unpleasant radio shock jock. And she said, well, I don't know anything about this guy. So she got advice, and someone said, oh, look, just talk over the top of him. He can't handle it. So he asked his first question. She let fly at him, and then eventually he said, oh, you Labor people talk underwater. And she said, I'm not Labor. You haven't done your homework, and Pauline Hanson is your problem. Now, finally, with her hand out there looking like she's in that big statue in South America, is Joanne Lovett. Now, she also did a presentation for us recently. And Joanne is a river restoration person. So she works with farming communities, landowners and so on, to restore rivers and watercourses to something like their natural state. And they are so important. And I goaded her a bit because I took a picture of the concrete spoon drain near my house. And I said, well, this is my local creek. What do you think of that? And she just looked stunned. But that concrete drain represents so much about the way we've treated rivers. Like a river or a creek or stream, it's an engineering problem. The job of a stream is to remove water, but it's done vast damage. The natural ecosystem around that water has been basically pretty much wrecked. And she told me, now this is for our carbon, interest in carbon, that a degraded stream will store about 2% of the carbon of a healthy one. Now, I finished with Joanne's chapter because it kind of, at the time I got to her chapter, I wasn't really sure what the overarching theme of the book would be. And I realized in writing her chapter that it's about hope. What does it mean to have hope? Now, after I interviewed Joanne, the same day, in fact, I went to interview Clive Hamilton. You might know his name, Clive. I knew Clive from an event I ran for National Science Week, and Clive's an interesting character. And I asked Clive, how do you feel about the current situation, which is basically the poll we just did, right? And I noticed, by the way, everybody's places on 6 to 9, 6 to 10 in terms of seriousness. Yeah. And Clive put his hand on his head and he said, I asked myself, how do I answer this question? I don't know how to talk about this. How do I talk to my grandchild about this? I don't want to talk to my grandson about this. So hope is a tricky thing, and I'll finish off a bit more about hope, but I want to now go into the things that I learned from these people, which to me are lessons for my involvement with CCL. And I very crudely lump people into passengers and pilots. So the passenger, you know a passenger when they're not happy because they complain. A passenger is a person who just feels powerless. It's the pilots who are in control. Now, we are all capable of being pilots, and each of us, by being a member of CCL, has decided that to some degree or other we can be a pilot too. We are not powerless. And each of the people in the book have displayed this very trait. The next one that I learned is that, and in fact, I teased Joanne again a little bit. I opened her chapter by saying, the situation is dire and only one man can save us. Well, you know, it's always one man and he's got a gun. Well, and her reaction was pretty good. The most powerful tool we have, the most powerful tool, is the network. Is everybody, is the people that we work with. Yes, Requiem for a Species. I just saw your comment. Yes, a very gloomy book, and that really tallies with Clive's demeanour. In fact, Clive told me a story. He said he was doing a presentation to a group, and he said, I think it was about the time for Requiem for a Species, the time it came out, and he said, I laid it out so brutally and so clearly, and a kind of pall of despondency came across the hall. And after the presentation, somebody came up to me and said, you can't do that to people. You've got to give people hope. And Clive said, what, you want me to lie to people? Why don't we just tell people the truth and then deal with it? And if they're depressed, so be it. And by the way, that interview is available. I can share a link to that. That's a short interview, a 15, 20 minute. I can share that outside this. So CCL is very much about the network. And here we are, we've got what, a dozen or more of us online. And it's through each other that we can achieve what we need to achieve. Now, the way networking operates is a big topic, which I won't go into, but that is really central to the stories that I learned in the book. Every person in the book used the network in some way or other. Now, the next one got me thinking about leadership. You know, of course, Martin Luther's famous speech. Martin Luther stood up before that audience and he had a prepared speech, and he was reading from a script, and somebody called out to him and said, Martin, tell us about your dream. And he stopped, and he ad-libbed from that point on. He said, I have a dream. Now, Martin Luther King did not say, I have a plan. Can you imagine if he'd said, I have a plan? No one would remember his speech. The thing about I have a dream He was describing a vision. Why is it that we want to do this thing? And so many speeches you hear from people are all about the what and the how, and they forget the why. If you can get people to buy into the why, then they will find a way to achieve the how and the what. And if they believe in it strongly enough, they will climb over broken glass to achieve that thing. And each of the people in the book are in their own way leaders, they're mentors, but they were also mentored by other people. And they told me stories about people in their lives who had been leaders to them. So Leonard Cohen was talking to someone like Gail Rudwick, who is an environmental activist. And he said all the lights suddenly came on, and suddenly he realized I could do this thing. Now, this one is a bit more personal for me, and I think for each of us. I've just seen your polling, and we say everybody has said that our situation is rated to 6 or worse, and I opened my talk talking about somebody who I was told was clinically depressed because things are so serious, and sometimes I look at the world, I look at what's going on, and right recently I was down near Eden, I was looking at the burnt out landscape, and I'm just thinking we are in serious trouble. And I look at the human response to it and the mass denial that we are in, that everything is just going to be fine if we just spend enough money. All we need is more growth, more of the same. Well, more of what we're doing now is not going to solve our problem. But how do we maintain any kind of cheerfulness in all of this? And I think you'll all have your own answers, but this kind of is partly my take on it. This is one of my takes on it. And did that screen come up? There we go. I have to practice a form of willful denial. I just cannot go through every minute of the day thinking about our CO2 concentration being over, what is it now, 410 parts per million. Global population, 7.8 billion or whatever it is right now. It'll go up, by the way, in the time we've been speaking, global population will increase roughly in the order of 11,000 births over deaths in 1 hour. Right? So I am by nature an optimistic person. But I have to admit I really struggle. And you'll see on the slide we've got up now, this one I borrowed from Dr. Susie Burke at a presentation I went to not long ago, and she used this classification of different kinds of hope. And I think the one that nobody, including you, Andrew, would say is a Pollyanna hope, just like, yeah, whatever, we'll figure something out. And it's just like, that's just not realistic. But there's other flavors of it which say, look, things are really bad, but somehow we'll nut it out. And it's not downplaying the seriousness. So this kind of is my take on it.
Beauty.
I believe we're in serious trouble, but that's not an excuse to give up. And in fact, I talked about being depressed, and one of the ways I deal with being, or try to minimize my depression is by looking away and only looking when I really have to. But the other is, don't get depressed, get active. And for me, one of the best therapies is being active. And I would really, really encourage and welcome and praise all of us, all of you who are involved with CCL, because you haven't given up. If you had given up, you wouldn't be part of CCL.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to our CCL channel by hitting the button in the top left-hand corner of this screen. Spread the word of CCL by using the share icon to as many of your contacts as possible. Thank you. See you next video.